Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads, and I'm back with another reading vlog. So it is currently July 25th, and a couple of days ago, well actually about a week ago at this point, Barack Obama posted his summer reading list. And he does this every year, in case you aren't aware, over on his Instagram and probably on other social media as well, but I'm not on any other social media at this point. Over on his social media, he'll post a book list twice a year, once in the summer and once at the end of the year. He also does a music playlist, and I always just like seeing what he is reading just because I find it interesting. If anyone in the world talks about what books they're reading, I'm interested. Hence why I'm on BookTube and Bookish social media. So this isn't exclusive just to him, but obviously he is a person of note. His lists tend to lean into literary fiction, some like dad books, which makes sense, he's a dad, and then some like nonfiction that tends to talk about social issues that he's interested in, which again makes sense. So yeah, his 2023 summer reading list has come out. There's 9 books on the list, and I think half are books that I have heard of, half are books I have not, and there's a decent amount of books in here that I was already interested in. And so I was like, you know what? Let me spend the rest of the summer reading Obama's reading list and see how it goes for me. Again, there are 9 books on this list, and I haven't been reading enough to like say that I'll definitely be able to get through 9 books in a month. But you know, you never know. No harm in trying. I also don't know how long any of these books are, which is going to be very interesting to see, because I have a feeling some of these nonfiction books might give me a run for my money. I also feel like this is a good reading list to start with because I already had one of the books out for the library, and that is All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. I don't know if you're gonna be able to clearly see this on my Kindle, but I checked out the ebook from the library because I had read Blacktop Wasteland whenever that originally came out. Absolutely adored it. And then I tried to read Razorblade Tears, and I was really enjoying it. However, that book is so violent, and so I had to put it down because like I just couldn't handle it. I'm a weak girl when it comes to violence, and so I wanted to give this one a try because even if it is violent, like this guy can write well. So I had this one already checked out from the library. This is one of the books on the list. So I figured, let's just try. Leading up to Labor Day weekend, we'll see how much I can read from this list. And I'm gonna start with this S.A. Cosby book. My library is mainly going to be dictating what books I try and what order I read things. I put a bunch of these on hold. I know some of them were already available. Some of them are being shipped in from other libraries. So we'll see how it goes, but I'll be starting with this S.A. Cosby book. Hi everyone, it's the next day, and I thought I would just provide a little bit of an update. I am about a third of the way through the new S.A. Cosby book, and I'm also starting dinner, so don't mind me. Just gonna let that pan sit and warm up while I talk to you. I am thoroughly enjoying this book. I really enjoy the way S.A. Cosby writes. It's just really well done. His books are on the darker side, and this is definitely no exception. It isn't as violent though, which I appreciate. Like the stuff that they're talking about is really dark, but there's no like actual on-page violence, which is what I had a hard time with Razorblade Tears. So this book is following a character named Titus. He is the first black sheriff in this town in Virginia. It's where he grew up, but he left for a while and did some work for the FBI, things like that, but then his dad got sick, and so he moved back home. And the story begins with a school shooting, and there is a boy who brings a gun to school, shoots one of the teachers at the school, and then this shooter ends up dying, and you come to find out that the teacher that he shot was like very well loved in the community, but not everything was on the up and up, and some of the stuff that he was a part of is on the darker side, and it's a bit much. Like again, nothing super graphic is happening, but like the stuff that they're talking about, like the topics themselves are on the darker side. So I would say, like, if you're someone who has a hard time where kids are involved in crimes, like this might be a difficult book to read, but I'm really enjoying the way that it's written. There's a lot of really interesting stuff happening with the main character as well. They hint to things that have happened in his past, and I'm hoping that they talk about it a little bit more. Like they keep referencing an event that happened in the past that also forced him to come back home and leave the FBI. I'm hoping it's addressed at some point, which I'm assuming it will be because I'm pretty sure this book isn't part of a series. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. Like, I have no plans for the evening. It's disgusting outside. It's like 100 degrees, or the feels like is 100 degrees. I think it's actually in the 90s, and it's humid and disgusting, so I don't plan on leaving my house. So my only plans are to cook dinner and then read this book, and I might actually finish this book today or tomorrow, which is good because I have some library books waiting for me that I could start potentially tomorrow. So there we go. Now let's make dinner. All right, it is Friday, and I finished last night All the Sinners Bleed. That book was so good. That is literally exactly what I want when I want like a fast-paced mystery thriller type of book. Like, that is my jam. Now, I will say this book is very dark, and as I mentioned in an earlier clip, I believe, if you have any sort of like hesitations or triggers around like kids being involved in bad things, then don't read this book, because that is a big part of it. Like, they don't go into graphic detail about that stuff, but it is referenced because that is a lot of the crime. This book I would probably rate like a 4.25 out of 5 stars. It wasn't a perfect book for me. There were some like little things that happened. I won't get into like spoilers about the plot, and so I won't get into detail comments about like what didn't work for me, but if you've read it, it has to do with like the main character's background. Like, they keep making reference to an event that happened in his past that caused him to leave the FBI and move back home and become sheriff of this town. And when the event is revealed, I was like, I mean, I understand like why you got fired and why you moved back home, but like, it shouldn't be torturing you like this, in my opinion. But maybe I'm a terrible person, I don't know. So but yeah, it's such a good book, such a good book. I love S.A. Cosby, and I love the way he writes. His stuff is like dark and violent and all that jazz, but so well written. Like, these books need to be made into movies. These would be such good movies or like miniseries. Ugh, has anyone optioned his stuff yet? Because they should. I also got notifications from my library that a bunch of books that I put on hold came in. So I thought I would do a little library haul so you could see some of the other books that I will potentially be reading. So I have big old tote bag here full of books. I'm just going to be pulling these out. This is in no particular order, but I'll tell you what I do know about them, or my reactions to them, and my reading plans for the rest of this vlog. All right, first one, Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. I read this author's previous book, Evicted. I think it won the Pulitzer Prize a few years ago, and that's why I picked it up, and I really enjoyed that book. And so I had already had this one on my list to read. I was actually planning on reading this for like Nonfiction November, but this also works. I also haven't read any nonfiction so far this year, so I feel like this list will help with that quite a bit. Next up, we have Small Mercies by Dennis Lehane. I've read one other Dennis Lehane book in my lifetime, and I've watched the movie Shutter Island, so if that counts for anything. So I have like a little bit of experience with him. This is definitely one of those books I consider like dad mystery books. I'm always willing to give it a chance because I did enjoy the previous Dennis Lehane book that I read. I also have this one checked out as an audiobook because it was available, and so it might get read that way. Next is What Napoleon Could Not Do by D.K. Neuro. I don't know, I'm probably not saying that name correctly. This is one of the books on the list that I never heard of before prior to seeing this list. And so, one, that intrigues me. Two, this cover is really fantastic. Really big fan of that. And three, I genuinely don't know anything about this book outside of it follows people who immigrate to the United States, I believe from Ghana. I like going into books knowing as little as possible, and this is definitely one of those books. So I have like no idea whether this will or will not work for me, but based on the little that I know, it feels like it could. It could. Next up is this big hunker of a book, King a Life by Jonathan Eigg. It's a big old biography of Martin Luther King Jr. This is one of those that also does not have any renewals as of right now available to me. You know, I think it's a pretty popular biography that came out this year. And let's see, how many pages is it? Really? Oh, it's not as bad as I thought. 557. I was expecting it to be higher than that, honestly. And like the font isn't terribly sized in here. And so I might come up with some sort of like reading plan with this one to try to read through like a couple chapters every day to get through it over the course of the next month, because I have exactly like a month to get through it. So that's what I'm thinking right now for this one. And then the final book that I currently have checked out from the library is Birnam Wood by Eleanor Catton. This is a book that's been on a lot of people who read literary fiction, like their most anticipated list. I never read The Luminaries. The size of it really intimidated me, but I'd always been intrigued by The Luminaries and I kind of have been wanting to read it, but then this was like on the list, and so I'm like, you know what, this is like a more reasonable size for a person like me, so I feel like if I like this, I'll probably pick up The Luminaries. Again, I don't know anything about it. I've been kind of avoiding reviews of it because of the fact that I've been wanting to read it, but it's definitely like one of those buzzy books of 2023. So as of right now, the books that I cannot renew, meaning that other people have them on hold, so I need to read and return them like on their due date, is this one, and this one. However, these two I have 4 weeks on, and this one I only have 2 weeks on. So this one will be first. And then also, like I said, I have the audiobook of this one, so that could potentially help with working through that. And then I'm gonna need to read a couple chapters of this probably every day in order to get through it. So that's what I'm thinking right now. We'll see what happens. You know, I'll keep you all updated, but that's my little library haul, and it's time to start another book. Oh, hi everyone. Let's see, am I in focus? Yes, I'm in focus. Great. Hi. It's been a little bit since I've provided an update, but haven't had much to update you on until today. Started listening to the audiobook of Small Mercies by Dennis Lehane. This book is freaking great. I'm already like 60% of the way through. May have been listening to it during my workday, and I'm like very surprised by how much I'm enjoying this book. Like, I've only read one Dennis Lehane book, and everything else I know about him is in relation to the movies adaptations, but like I've always enjoyed the movie adaptations. I liked the book that I read from him, which I don't remember what it's called, Since We Fell. That sounds right. But this is really well done. It's a book that's like super interesting because it like takes place in Boston in the 1970s, so you're dealing with those sorts of political things, but it also has to do with when they introduced like busing to Boston. So basically, in order to integrate the schools and things like that, the Supreme Court or whatever judicial power that did it basically forced these schools to start busing in order to make things more fair. You know, no political rants here, but what is also happening is you are following this woman named Mary Pat, whose daughter goes missing. So she is basically lives on the poorer side of Southie. All these Boston neighborhoods are being like mentioned throughout this book, and I'm just like, sure, everything I know about Boston comes from Good Will Hunting, basically. This woman named Mary Pat, her daughter goes missing, and she basically just like goes on a rampage. The way that I've been thinking about it in my brain is like, this book feels like it's Taken, but with a mom at the helm of it. And the other like thought that came into my head during this was like, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, except really it should be hell hath no fury like a mother scorned, because like this is a mother who is like out to figure out what the F happened to her daughter. Like, this book is violent. There was like literally scenes that I was listening to today while driving home, and I was just like, because, you know, I don't do violence very well, but it's so engaging and I'm very intrigued to see where it's going. There are like a couple of different like plot lines happening in this book. Some of them are pretty obvious. Like, the other plot line that happens is that there is a black boy who ends up dying. The original thought is that like he got like run over by a train. People think that he's a drug dealer because he's black. You like know from the beginning, because it's a book, that these storylines are gonna kind of be related to each other, but it's been very interesting to see sort of how everything plays out. Mary Pat is a fascinating character, and I will talk more about her when I finish the book. So that's going very well. I've also started reading Birnam Wood, and I am right around the 100-page mark of this book. I will say, like, in the beginning, while starting this book, I was like, I don't know how much I'm gonna vibe with this, but I liked the writing. Like, the writing was really working for me. I feel like I haven't read, like, good literary fiction that's kind of, like, lighter literary fiction in a while. Not, like, lighter, but, like, I don't know, they're like a lighter tone, I should say, but it's still like literary fiction. So that was happening in this book, and I was like, okay, I'm enjoying the writing style. I'm going to keep going to see what's happening, because I did not read the synopsis to this book or any other book, which I will also get to in a second. And then by like page like 70, some information gets revealed, and I was like, what? and then now I need to know what's going to happen. So I'm very much enjoying this book, and I'm hoping to make some good progress on it. But like reading physical books definitely takes longer than listening to the audiobook, especially when you listen to it doing other tasks. And then the other thing is that I went to the library. 2 more books came in. First one is Blue Hour by Tiffany Clarke Harrison, which I've never heard of, didn't know anything about. This is a very small, thin book, which I was not expecting, but now I have this one. And then the other one is Hello Beautiful by Napolitano, which I don't know anything about either. And the only thing I know about it is the fact that it was an Oprah book club book, and so I saw this cover everywhere, but I don't know anything else about it. And so like one of the things about me is the fact that like I like to know as little as possible going into a book. That's basically what I want to know about a book, is its vibe. I like to know genre and vibe. Those are the most important things to me. And like obviously if there are like difficult topics or anything like that, like it's good to kind of have that in your brain going into it so you're kind of prepared. But I am very much just like a genre and vibe girl, and I've been going into a lot of these books mostly just knowing genre, and it's been really interesting to see sort of how it's all playing out. The other fun thing is just like kind of like I feel like I'm making judgments about Barack Obama based on these books that I'm currently reading. Right now, you know, the hit rate is 100% for me personally. Really enjoyed the first book, really enjoying these 2. So right now, Obama's 3 for 3 with his books. We'll see how it goes with the rest of them. But it is very interesting seeing which ones he decided to put on his list and seeing like what the agenda is, because there's always an agenda when it comes to politicians, even when they're not politicians anymore. Like some of them are like very like obvious Obama picks. Like I feel like a Dennis Lehane is a very like safe choice, but also because of the topic of this specific Dennis Lehane book, if it's like, all right, yeah, I get it. Same thing with like S.A. Cosby. He feels like very much in the Obama wheelhouse. Books like Poverty and MLK biography, like of course, but like books like this, Blue Hour, I know nothing about, so it'll be very interesting to start that and see where it's going. So yeah, I will provide more updates when I can, but just know that I am enjoying these books a lot. I just finished Birnam Wood. This book is a ride. This book is a ride. Holy crap. I guess I know now why people like Eleanor Catton so much, potentially. This book is... It's a lot. A lot happens in this book. I'm like trying to think now, like, how do you summarize this book? So the story begins with you finding out about these 2 characters like Mira and Shelley, and they are part of this like environmental organization sort of situation, but it's like super like sketchy and like not like properly formed and things like that. It's basically like these 2 people along with a handful of other people, and they try to like convince places to let them start gardens in like their land. So it starts with you learning about them and their like organization, and then suddenly you're introduced to like this like billionaire guy. You also learn about this guy named Tony who like used to be part of Birnam Wood. He like kind of had a relationship with Mira, and like suddenly like stuff just starts happening and it gets like very intense very quickly. Like I'm reading this book and I'm like, I know that this book is around like 420 pages, and I'm at like the 390 page mark, the 400 page mark, and things aren't resolving. And I'm like doing the thing where I'm like trying to read faster so I can figure out what was going to happen, and holy cow. I don't know if there's a good way to summarize what this book is, because like where this book starts is not at all where this book ends, and it's wild. This wasn't like a perfect book for me. Like this is not a 5-star book for me personally. This book loves to go on and on about the things that it's talking about, like especially for some of the characters who are part of like the more environmentally quote-unquote extreme sort of people. Like you're very much like in their heads, and so sometimes it feels a little bit like rambling. There's like a lot of like philosophizing and being in their own heads and playing through potential scenarios and imagining things play out and stuff like that a couple of these characters do. Actually, I would say the majority of the main characters do. That gets to feel like a little bit much, and so there were definitely times where I was kind of just like skimming those sections, being like, yeah, all right, I get it, and wanting to get to like the real movement in the story. But I also feel like that's a very like literary fiction thing to do. So if you read a lot of literary fiction, you'll probably either enjoy it or know about it and be used to it and not be bothered by it. But if you don't read a lot of literary fiction, I can see that getting on people's nerves. But this book is crazy. I would say read the first 100 pages. And if you're not intrigued by the first 100 pages, you're not going to be intrigued by the rest of the book. But I feel like if you read the first 100 pages, you'll see some reveals, and that'll like give you a good indication of like whether or not you should keep going. But man, this book is a ride. It's wild. It's wild what happens in this book. Was not expecting anything that happened in those last like 20 pages. Anyways, I don't know which book I'm going to be picking up next. I'm going to be completely honest. I need to like look at my library website and see what books are due soon. But I have not finished Small Mercies by Lehane yet. I am still listening to the audiobook of that, but I did put it on pause for a little bit, but I'm pretty close to finishing that. So that will be finished soon and I will have thoughts. But this is also a book that's kind of wild too. So this is a very interesting list of books, but I'm very much getting to the end of like the popular books on the list, so to speak, or the popular fiction books, I should say. And I need to start making some progress on maybe some of these bigger nonfiction books, aka King, if I plan on finishing them anytime soon. Hi, it's a very gloomy Friday here in this world that I'm currently recording in, but I finished some stuff and I have some updates on books and things like that, so I thought I would jump on here. It's like the beginning of my workday, so really I need to do this and then get to work. So I finished listening to the audiobook of Small Mercies, and I liked this, but I didn't love it. Now, one thing I will say that I didn't mention at the beginning is that this book uses the N-word, so whatever your feelings are around that, I do want to put that out there. Like it says the actual word. It has characters who say the actual word. And listening to the audiobook of this is real interesting. That happens because it's a little jarring. But like this book is really interesting because it's dealing with like lots of different things all at the same time. So it's talking about like racism and things like that, but it's also talking about poverty. The woman that you're mainly following in this book lives in a poor neighborhood in Boston. And so there's like a lot of interesting commentary in here about like racism and the way that like white people hate black people so much, but really the people that are like impacting them the most are really upper class people, and yet they don't try to do anything about them. But this book is also just like really dark and violent. The main character in this book is a mom whose daughter basically goes missing, and this woman goes on like a rampage. I know I talked about this earlier because I was like making faces while listening to the audiobook of this, and like yeah, you just see sort of like the absolute desperation of this mother to figure out what happened to her daughter and then like get revenge on the people who are involved in this situation. She like just does not care anymore. Like her first husband, I think, died. Her second husband, she got a divorce from. Her son died of an overdose after coming back from the Vietnam War. And then now her daughter is missing. So she basically has like no one left. So she just like does not give an F about like what she's doing anymore. And that has like very interesting consequences. And so it's like really interesting to read a book like that because I feel like you rarely see like moms taking revenge on things, or at least I don't see very much of it. And it's also just like interesting having like Lehane, this like, you know, older white guy, tell this story. But overall, I feel like this is a good book. Like this is a good dad book. There are parts of this that like I really enjoyed, like I said, but like towards the end I started to get like just a little bit tired, honestly. And that tends to happen to me with audiobooks faster than with physical books. So potentially if I was reading the physical copy, I wouldn't have cared as much or noticed it as much. I was also partially just like really interested to see how it was going to end, because to me like this woman was doing such crazy things. I had no idea how the story was going to go. And this book is not like hopeful like it is to a certain degree, but it's really not. And it's really dark and things like that. So just know that going into it. I'm not going to go into spoilers into how it ended, but yeah, it can be rough if you're the type of person who doesn't read books that are like super violent. But anyways, solid book overall. And then now I am currently working my way through Hello Beautiful because this is the next one that is due back in my library very soon. I am very much enjoying this book. So I'm already like halfway through this book reading experience, if you can see the bookmark there, and I'm very much enjoying this. And you are following these three different characters. First there's William, who is this boy who, when he was a newborn, his sister died of like a flu or pneumonia or something along those lines. Once his sister passed away, like his parents were so distraught over this death that they basically like did not care for William. Like they just ignored him. They couldn't deal with like having another kid and things like that with one of their kids dead. So William grows up just like this very like lonely and obviously like a traumatized kid. He finds a basketball, I think, and basically like goes to the park every day to start playing basketball as something to do. Like after a few years, you know, there's like a bunch of kids who are playing basketball together and they get him to join, and so then he starts playing with these kids all the time, and then he starts getting really good at basketball, ends up like joining the high school basketball team and all this stuff, does really well for himself. He ends up getting recruited to go to Northwestern University here in Chicago, or outside of Chicago I should say, and playing basketball there, and there he meets Julia, which is the second perspective that you read from. Julia grew up in Chicago. She and her family like lived in Pilsen. She has three other sisters. Her and William end up getting together, and then the third perspective you read from is from Sylvia, who is the second oldest sister in this family. And it's just like this really beautiful story about like family and love and like trauma. It takes place from like the 1970s through the 80s. I mean, maybe it goes beyond the 80s, but that's as far as I've gotten so far. You have like Julia, who is like this really ambitious woman, and William, who has like no idea kind of what he's doing or how to function as like a proper human being in this world. And there's some like really tragic things that happen. Like there are chapters in here that made me genuinely so sad, but it's so beautiful, and I'm very intrigued to see where it's going. If you read this book, some big stuff happens around the halfway point, and I'm genuinely very curious to see where this is going to go. Like I would rather be spending my day reading this book right now. I just want to be in this world. I really am enjoying the writing style. It reminds me of Anne Patchett actually, and so I feel like if you are the type of person who enjoys like Anne Patchett books, I feel like you will also enjoy this book. It feels like it's like in the same world. It's not exactly the same, but her fiction reminds me this reminds me of Anne Patchett's fiction, which for me is a high praise for this book because I really love Anne Patchett. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this one, and I'm hoping that I can finish this like within the next day or so. I mean, I do have kind of a busy weekend ahead of me, but hoping to work my way through this one pretty quickly. And then the next one on my list will probably be Poverty, because I'm pretty sure that's the next one that's due at the library. I was able to get a renewal on the Giant King biography that you can see like right here, this big yellow one. That's also the second books I have checked out from the library right now. So now it's not due back until September, which is great. Can I finish that big chunker by Labor Day? I mean, if I really tried, yes, I could. Will I though? We shall see. Hi everyone. First, I need you to know that you are currently sitting on a precarious set of items in order to become my tripod, because I have no idea where I put the tripod for this camera. Like I haven't known since I moved, and I still haven't found it yet. I'll buy a new one eventually. Anyways, I finished reading Hello Beautiful last night, and so figured I should come on and talk about it. This was a great book. The story starts with William, who was born in Boston, ends up playing basketball and moving to Chicago and playing at Northwestern. And then the rest of the book basically takes place in Chicago. And it's funny because like reading that, I'm just like, well, I know why Obama picked this book. But this is actually a really beautiful story about sisters, which I appreciate the fact that I suppose this is giving cookies for doing the bare minimum to a certain degree, but it's just nice to see a grown man recommending a book about family and sisters. This book is really melancholy, and it deals a lot with like death and grief and things along those lines. I saw people who had compared this to like Little Women, and there are references in here to Little Women as well, because there are 4 sisters in this story, and they also compare themselves to the sisters of Little Women and things like that. And so I feel like if you want that sort of like melancholy sisterly vibes, this could potentially be a good book for you. Now, I say that with the giant caveat of I had never read Little Women. So, but I really enjoyed my experience with this. Like, this book is full of like messy drama too. And so it's really interesting to see sort of how this book deals with family conflict that's like really, really messy. It's also interesting to see sort of like how everything resolves. I did find the ending to be kind of predictable to a certain degree. You can kind of see where everything is going, but there is also something about it that's very like sweet and heartwarming. And so if you need a book that will potentially make you cry, but also feel like a blanket is wrapped around you, I feel like this would be a good one to pick up. And I still stand by my Ann Patchett comp. It has very similar vibes. It's not quite at Ann Patchett level, but also Ann Patchett has written like a billion books at this point, not a billion, but, and so I could very much see this author getting to that level as well. In terms of what's next on my reading list, I looked at my library website and none of the books that I have checked out for this little vlog is due immediately. But I did get an ebook copy of Poverty, and so I do think I'm gonna pick up this one next, partially to work in a nonfiction because I haven't read any nonfiction so far this year. And the other thing is that I have the ebook copy of it, and so that is due soon. So I have a feeling I'm gonna start this one very soon as probably an ebook copy. That's my plan for now. But it is a beautiful day outside. Like, it's the first day in a while that's not raining or scorching hot, it feels like, and I don't have plans tonight. It's a Tuesday night. Not that I would normally have plans, but usually we're like cooking or have like some errands we have to run or something, and we don't today. And so I'm gonna go outside. I'm gonna prune some of my flowers that I've inherited and I'm desperately trying not to kill. So yeah, gonna go outside, get some vitamin D, and then I'll check back in when I have something to say about Poverty or whatever else book I plan on reading. Hi, can you hear the sizzling in the background? Potentially. Anyways, I'm cooking dinner and I thought it was time for an update. I have started the audiobook of The Wager, and this is a book that I am very surprised because my library is in high demand for this book, and like typically it doesn't take me very long to get physical copies of books, but this one's really in demand and I haven't been able to get a physical copy of it, and I actually got the audiobook version of it before the physical, which rarely happens. So I'm currently listening to it on audio, and in the beginning I was like, this book isn't working for me, but I just got to part 2 in the audiobook and things are now getting interesting. So I'm very intrigued. I shouldn't say very intrigued. This is very much a dad book. So if you are the type of person who likes like history books and you like nonfiction, and like when you picture a dad book like a US biography or something along those lines, this is definitely one of those books. This is written by the author who wrote Killers of the Flower Moon, which I never read. So there could be like some potential overlap there, but I'm not 100% sure. I do think this will reach a broader audience because of that one, but this one definitely feels more historical. Like, it's presented like a mystery because it's about this like big shipwreck. And so there is like some intrigue to it, but I can't say necessarily like this is a nonfiction that everyone's going to like. But it definitely gives off dad vibes, which makes sense for Obama to recommend it because he's very much a dad and has strong dad vibes. So currently listening to that. Have not been doing a great job of reading recently, but I'm hoping to change that this week. So starting the audiobook of this. I'm currently making dinner. I'm making like a chicken parm sort of pasta. So working on that while I wait for my husband to get home from work. And tonight we're gonna go see the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, which I'm very excited about because the previews actually looked really fun. And so looking forward to that tonight. So I'm not gonna be doing a lot of reading, but hopefully I'll have some actual book updates for you relatively soon. Soon in my time. It'll obviously be soon for you because you're watching an edited video. So back to dinner, or cooking dinner I should say. Hi all. So have some updates. I have 2 books that I finished. The first one was Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. This is a nonfiction book that I think I said at the beginning I was looking forward to because I had read Matthew Desmond's other book. And this was like a really quick read. I didn't realize how Much of this book was just notes. See if I can try to find a page to show you. So like out of this is all just like notes and citations and comment footnotes and things like that. The book itself is less than 200 pages long. So this was a very quick read, and I did enjoy this as much as you can enjoy a book about poverty. It did make me really sad, and even though it was a fast read, it took me longer to finish because I kept putting it down because it was making me too sad. So the question that Matthew Desmond is trying to answer with this book is looking into why poverty exists in the United States when we are such a rich country. What he does in this book is he basically like goes through all of the different theories and ideas behind it and kind of debunks a lot of the commonly held beliefs around poverty. He looks at different like laws that have gone into place and studies done around poverty and things along those lines, and like lots of different angles at it. So it's like the housing crisis, as well as like racial inequality, as well as like the like pay scale and things like that. One of the things that he does in this book that I personally enjoy is like just also looking at the individual sort of contributions to all of this. Like he looks at like the big systemic things that have happened, but he's also like, you know, the average American doesn't really care that much about poverty. Like, yes, we all care to a certain degree, but we don't care enough to want to really do anything about it, and we don't care enough to make ourselves uncomfortable or inconvenience ourselves at all. And he points to things like the fact that, you know, people say that we need to build more affordable housing, but then when affordable housing is going up in different neighborhoods and things like that, most of the time people get really upset about it. Like the people living in that space don't want the poor people living really close to them, things along those lines. We all need to do our parts to wrestle with that. There's also things like, yes, we want people to be paid fairly in theory, but if that means like we have to pay more money to acquire a thing, people get upset at that. Or if it means that we can have like less of that thing, you know, people are not okay with that, things like that. Like we're not okay sacrificing our own comfort for the sake of like someone else being okay, especially when it's like this sort of like hypothetical person, you know, like we don't actually know the people who are behind it. Hence why companies like Amazon can exist and do well, and people don't really think too much about it because they want the convenience of the same day, next day shipping, and not really thinking too hard about the financial impact that has, like the physical toll that takes on the warehouse workers and drivers and things along those lines. Thinking about all of the different ways that I, as I'm pretty sure I'm upper middle class American, can take advantage of people in poverty with the choices that I'm making. You know, it's something to think about. But also like he talks about the fact that like we all as a society need to be more involved in the day-to-day choices that are being made by our local governments and our local politicians. And we also need to create proximity to poverty. We've all become really well at like isolating ourselves in comfortable bubbles. It's required of us to like participate. So yeah, this was a good book. It's definitely different from Evicted in the sense that like you're not really following the stories of people who are living in poverty. So if you are someone who enjoys nonfiction along those lines, this is definitely like more like a collection of evidence based on like statistics and facts and papers and studies and things along those lines. So in that sense, it can feel a little bit drier, but again, it's a relatively short book and one that I thought was very insightful in how we discuss poverty. The other book that I finished was Blue Hour by Tiffany Clarke Harrison, another really short book. I read this one all in one day and I really enjoyed this book. I think this one has mixed reviews on Goodreads and I can somewhat understand why. You're following this unnamed narrator who is a multiracial woman who one of like her racial identities is that she is Black. You see her as she like talks about her relationship with her husband, how she wasn't planning on falling in love, wasn't planning on being a mother, anything along those lines until she met this man. And you see her go through that process, but also you see her struggling with the idea of being a mother and having a child and things along those lines for a multitude of reasons. It discusses the violence against Black people that happens all across our country and the anxiety and fears that come with the idea of bringing another Black person into this world and what could become of them. There are people close to her who are impacted by this sort of racial violence. There is also the fact that she has other trauma from her childhood that she is grappling with that impacts her feelings around families and motherhood. And I don't want to say more than that because I don't want to give away what happens in this book, but you just like follow this character as she like goes through this journey. I think this book does a really good job of like compiling the anxieties of the idea of like family and motherhood and things like that in like a current world that we're living in, because a lot of the things that this person, this narrator, has thought, I have definitely had some of those thoughts cross my mind as well, as someone who is relatively recently married and, you know, having the conversations around children and stuff like that for our family. These anxieties are real. Like the conversations around like whether or not we should be bringing kids into this world and how much of that is based in reality, how much of that is based on just like anxiety, things along those lines. The unnamed narrator in this book also deals with the inability to have kids, and so there's some discussions in here around abortions and miscarriages and things along those lines. And I just felt like this was just like a very like honest account of like what it's like for people who want to have children but are having a difficult time with conceiving and things along those lines, and the stress that that puts on a relationship. I just think it was just like really, really well done, like really beautifully done. Again, it's a really short book. I read this one all in one day, which is very rare for me, but I just found it to be really compelling and really beautiful. Also really sad, but also really hopeful, and like watching this woman grapple with those anxieties was pretty refreshing for me, to be honest. So yeah, big fan of that book. Very surprised because I've never heard of it before, and if it wasn't on this list, I don't know if I ever would have read it, but definitely one of my favorites out of this group. So it is almost Labor Day weekend, and like my unofficial goal with this whole reading Obama summer reading list was to see like how much I could get in before summer is over, aka Labor Day weekend. And I have technically 3 books left. I'm still listening to The Wager on audiobook, which is fine. It's not really my jam, and like I don't know if I will finish it, to be honest. Like there's some interesting tidbits that have come out of this book, like the fact that there's a lot of phrases that are very common in English now that apparently come from like being on a ship and working on a ship. Like the author talks about the fact that when people on a ship would get sick, the doctors would put them like underneath, like not on the, you know, on the main level exposed to the elements. They would take them underneath, and it was because like it would be like raining and stuff like that on these sick people, so they took them underneath, and so that's where the phrase under the weather comes from. There's also the fact that turning a blind eye comes from the fact that when people would be using the like telescopes, I'm losing all of my words, but anyways, when they'd be looking through the telescope things, if they didn't want to like looked at the thing that they were being forced to look at, they would put it on their closed eye instead of their open eye, so they're turning a blind eye. Little things like that that I find really interesting. But I will say, like, I don't feel like I've paid close attention to this audiobook, and maybe when I pick it back up again, I'll like plug back into it, but it just feels like it's going in one ear out the other, and I'm not really retaining a lot. So we'll see how that goes. I also still have the Giant King biography right there. Yep, that I have not touched at all. So that's definitely a fail. But the third book that I have is What Napoleon Could Not Do by D.K. Neuro, which I am intrigued by this book. And I have, you know, a couple more days left to read it. I am going out of town this weekend though. And so my debate is like, should I bring this with me? Because I don't think I'm gonna have a lot of time to read. But maybe I could finish it before the trip. Unlikely, but it's possible. Even if I don't, maybe I could still bring it with me. It's a road trip though. It's not like a plane ride, because if it was a plane ride, I definitely could finish it. But it's a road trip, and I don't know how I'm gonna feel reading in the car. That's my update. I'm gonna try to finish this book by Monday. Can I do it? We shall see. Hi everyone. So it is the Tuesday after Labor Day, so I am going to consider this little mini project officially a wrap. So I'll give you a little bit of a rundown of what exactly happened at the last part of this little reading adventure or challenge or whatnot. So at my last update, I said I was going to start What Napoleon Could Not Do. And I took this with me this past weekend while we went on our little mini road trip to Minnesota. We went to the state fair and I brought that along, and I was like reading it in the hotel room while we were just kind of like hanging out. And I was like, you know what? This is not the book that I want to be reading at the moment. The first couple chapters just weren't really working for me. I'm not gonna get too much into it, and it's very possible that this book gets better, or I would think it's better if I read more into it, but I was on vacation. I didn't want to like force myself to read something. And at that same time, I also got notifications that some ebook holds had come in, and one of those holds was for King. Like I left the hold on because I was like, I still want to read this biography at some point, and so whenever it comes in, I'll start it. And it happened to come in this past weekend. And so obviously like big dense biography is not necessarily the book to be reading while on vacation, but honestly it's a very engaging and readable biography. I mean, I'm also someone who, you know, enjoys biographies, so I'm actually really enjoying it. Like we came back from Minnesota on Sunday evening, and I spent most of Monday just kind of like chilling and going back and forth between reading and doing some cleaning because, you know, we had just come back from a trip and we needed to, and then watching the new One Piece live action adaptation because my husband is a huge One Piece fan, and so I'm not required legally to watch this with him. But yeah, I've started the biography. I've gotten through the first part, which is about this much of the book. The book is split into 3 parts, and then like obviously there's a lot of notes and things like that, citations at the end of the book. So the total page count for this is around 500 to 600 pages. So I do plan on continuing that book, even though this video will now be wrapped up. You'll have to come back for my September wrap up to hear my thoughts on that. So this was officially a DNF, and then The Wager is officially a DNF because it's due back at the library tomorrow, and I just don't know if I'm gonna bother listening to it, honestly, because like I was saying before, I'm not like super engaged with that audiobook right now, and so it just doesn't feel like worth it. Like I'd just be listening, but I wouldn't be retaining any of the information, and really what's the point of that? Overall, really happy with the way this turned out. I read a lot more than I thought I was going to doing this. Part of me wishes I'd been able to push through and read through all of them, but really that's no fun for me personally in terms of reading. But yeah, overall, I would say this was like a really nice little reading challenge for me personally, just because like a lot of the books that were picked fall really well into my wheelhouse and were books that I was already interested in, or like once I found out about them, I was interested in them. There were some nice little surprises in there too, books that I ended up enjoying a lot more than I thought I was going to. It got me to read at least one nonfiction book in its entirety, and I'll have a second one done soon. So overall, I feel like this was a huge success. So yeah, let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of the books on this list, if you've ever tried to read any of Obama's other little lists. Like I can't say that I'll definitely do this again in the future, but I definitely would be willing to consider it in the future, depending on what the lists look like. Like maybe I'll do this again towards the end of the year. I feel like the summer one is more fun just because there's so many end of the year lists that come out. Having like a short summer reading list like this is kind of fun to do. So yeah, I'm gonna go eat lunch now because it is that time of day on this Tuesday for me personally, and I hope you all have enjoyed this video. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.